In 1993, a British farmer named David Dixon parked his truck in his own driveway and refused to move it. Not because he was stuck. Not because it broke down. He did it on purpose, to block in a repairman's van. And he kept it there for 13 days. The repairman hadn't done anything wrong. He was just trying to fix a washing machine. But that washing machine wasn't just a washing machine. It was David's ticket, literally, to 2 free flights to America. Tickets he was promised. Tickets he never got. And David wasn't alone. Hundreds of thousands of people across Britain had bought vacuum cleaners, washing machines, and microwaves they didn't even want that year, all chasing the exact same promise. A promise made by one of the most trusted household names in the country. By the time the dust settled, this single marketing campaign would cost that company somewhere between £48 and £100 million. It would get executives fired. It would trigger lawsuits that dragged on for 6 years. It would even get the company stripped of a royal honor it had held for decades. All because somebody thought giving away free plane tickets was a good way to sell more vacuums. This is the story of the Hoover free flights fiasco, one of the most spectacular own goals in the history of marketing. And the wildest part? Everyone who actually understood math tried to warn them. To understand how a vacuum cleaner company nearly destroyed itself with a travel promotion, you first need to understand just how big Hoover actually was. In Britain, Hoover isn't just a brand name. It's a verb. People don't vacuum their living room, they Hoover it. That's the level of cultural dominance we're talking about. For most of the 20th century, if you owned a vacuum cleaner in the UK, chances are it said Hoover on the side, whether you wanted it to or not. The company traces back to 1908, when a department store janitor with bad dust allergies strapped a motor to a carpet sweeper and accidentally invented the modern vacuum cleaner. He sold the patent to a businessman named William Hoover, who turned it into an empire that spanned both sides of the Atlantic. For decades, that empire looked unshakable. But by the early 1990s, the cracks were showing. Britain, like much of the world, was in the middle of a brutal recession. Consumer spending was down. And Hoover was getting squeezed from every direction. Cheaper competitors were eating into its market share, and its once dominant 50% share of the UK vacuum market was steadily shrinking. The numbers tell the story better than anything else. Between 1987 and 1992, Hoover's profits collapsed from around $147 million down to just $74 million. That's roughly half, gone, in 5 years. Warehouses were filling up with unsold stock. Something had to change, and fast. Enter a tiny, largely forgotten travel agency called JSI Travel. JSI was in trouble too. They had a stockpile of airline seats they couldn't sell, and a recession full of customers who weren't exactly rushing out to book transatlantic holidays. So JSI's team came up with an idea, and pitched it to Hoover in early 1991. The pitch was simple: what if Hoover bundled free flights with its products? Spend a certain amount on a Hoover appliance, and JSI would supply the flights. Hoover moves its backlog of vacuums and washing machines. JSI offloads its unsold seats. Everybody wins. On paper, it looked clever. Almost elegant. Two struggling companies solving each other's problems with one single idea. The first version of the offer launched not long after, and it was relatively modest by comparison to what came later: spend over £100 on a Hoover product and get 2 free round-trip flights to a handful of destinations in Europe. And here's the thing, it worked. Customers loved it. Sales ticked up. Nothing had gone wrong yet. But somewhere in a Hoover boardroom, somebody looked at those early results and thought, if this worked with cheap flights to Europe, imagine what would happen if we offered flights to America instead. That decision is where this story goes from smart marketing gimmick to one of the most infamous business disasters of the decade. On November 1, 1992, Hoover rolled out the expanded version of the deal. The same £100 minimum spend, but now, instead of European flights, customers could claim 2 free round-trip tickets to New York or Orlando. Tickets that, on their own, would normally cost more than £600. Read that again. Spend £100 on a vacuum cleaner. Get flights worth £600. For free. If that sounds too good to be true, that's because, mathematically, it absolutely was. And at least one person tried very hard to stop it before it ever launched. A risk management consultant named Mark Kimber was brought in to review the numbers before the promotion went live. His conclusion was blunt. He later said that after looking at how the promotion would actually have to work in practice, he refused to even offer risk coverage for it. In his own words, it made no logical sense. Here's the math that alarmed him. JSI was charging Hoover roughly £600 for every pair of tickets it supplied. Which meant that for every customer who spent the bare minimum £100 and successfully claimed their flights, Hoover was losing approximately £500 per customer. The entire plan only worked under one very specific assumption, that most people wouldn't actually bother going through the process to claim their flights. Hoover was betting on apathy. On people losing interest, misplacing a form, or deciding the paperwork wasn't worth the hassle. It was a bet against human nature. And it was about to lose, spectacularly. Because here's what actually happened once word got out: British shoppers didn't see this as buy a vacuum, get free flights. They saw it as £100 for 2 round-trip tickets to America, and hey, I guess I get a free vacuum cleaner too. The psychology completely flipped. The appliance wasn't the product anymore. It was an afterthought. A formality. The flights were the actual product, and £100 was an absolute steal for them. So what did people do? They didn't buy the vacuum cleaner they actually needed. They went hunting for the absolute cheapest Hoover product on the shelf that still qualified for the deal, usually a specific budget model that just barely crossed the £100 threshold. Stores across the country started selling out. Not of premium products, of the cheapest possible qualifying item. One British newspaper, watching the chaos unfold in real time, joked that the country could soon be knee-deep in Hoover Turbomaster uprights. Hoover's factories couldn't keep up. They shifted to 7-day-a-week overtime production just to meet demand for a product line nobody particularly wanted. They just wanted the ticket that came stapled to it. And remember, every single one of these sales was actively losing the company money. The more successful the promotion looked from the outside, with vacuum cleaners flying off shelves and factories running around the clock, the deeper the financial hole was actually getting on the inside. This is the part of the story that makes it such a perfect case study. It wasn't a promotion that flopped from lack of interest. It was a promotion that failed because it worked too well. So how bad did it actually get? Let's talk numbers, because they're almost hard to believe. Hoover had originally forecast around 50,000 people would respond to the promotion. That was their internal planning estimate, 50,000 claims, spread out reasonably, manageable. What they actually got was over 200,000 valid claims, for something in the neighborhood of 400,000 individual airline seats. That's roughly 4 times their prediction, and remember, every single one of those claims represented a financial loss for the company, not a gain. Faced with a mountain of obligations it could never actually fulfill, Hoover did what a lot of companies do when they realize they've made an unfixable mistake. Instead of admitting it, they try to quietly make the problem disappear. And the tactics they use to do that are, frankly, where this story goes from bad business decision to genuinely villain behavior. Customers reported being told their application forms had been filled out incorrectly, conveniently, after they'd already made their purchase and there was nothing they could do about it. Others were offered flights departing from airports hundreds of miles from where they actually lived, making the free tickets essentially useless unless you were willing to take another trip just to get to your flight. And then there's the detail that, honestly, sounds almost too cartoonishly evil to be real. Hoover reportedly mailed out request forms to customers on Christmas Eve, timed so that the holiday postal delays would cause people to miss their 14-day deadline to send them back. A company that had spent the better part of a century building trust with British households was now actively scheming to make its own customers miss paperwork deadlines over Christmas. That is not a good look. That is, in fact, close to the worst possible look. Unsurprisingly, people were furious. And they didn't stay quiet about it. This is where David Dixon, the farmer with the truck, enters the story properly. Dixon had bought a Hoover washing machine specifically to qualify for the flights. When it broke down and a repairman came out to fix it, Dixon asked about the status of his tickets. The repairman, apparently fed up with fielding the exact same question from customer after customer, told Dixon that if he thought buying a washing machine entitled him to free flights to America, he must be an idiot. Dixon did not take that well. He blocked the repairman's van in his own driveway and refused to let it leave for 13 days. The story made national news, and Dixon became something of a folk hero for frustrated Hoover customers across the country. But Dixon wasn't the only one organizing. In 1993, a group calling itself the Hoover Holidays Pressure Group formed specifically to fight for customers who'd been denied their promised flights. It grew to include thousands of members. And in one of the boldest moves in the whole saga, 2 of its leaders bought shares in Hoover's American parent company, Maytag, specifically so they could attend the company's annual shareholder meeting in Iowa and confront the CEO directly, in person, on the record. It worked. The confrontation made headline news on both sides of the Atlantic, and by 1994, formal lawsuits over the fiasco were underway, lawsuits that would continue for years. And the financial damage was catastrophic. Depending on which estimate you look at, the promotion generated somewhere around £30 million in extra sales, but the cost of honoring even a fraction of the flight obligations ran anywhere from £48 million, according to more conservative estimates, up to figures as high as £100 million or more in some analyses. Let that sink in. A marketing campaign designed to boost sales during a recession ended up costing the company potentially more than 3 times what it brought in. Heads rolled. Literally, professionally speaking. Hoover's managing director, along with the vice president of marketing and the director of marketing services, all lost their jobs in the aftermath. The company tried to publicly shift blame onto the airlines it had partnered with, onto customers who supposedly filled out forms wrong, onto pretty much anyone except the executives who greenlit the promotion in the first place. It didn't work. The damage to Hoover's reputation in the UK was severe and, in many ways, permanent. This was a brand that had been so trusted, so embedded in British life, that its name had literally replaced the word vacuum in everyday conversation. And now it was a national punchline. In 1995, Hoover's European division was sold off to an Italian competitor. The lawsuits from angry customers dragged on all the way into 1998, 6 years after the promotion had first launched. And then there's maybe the most symbolically devastating consequence of all: the British royal family withdrew Hoover's royal warrant. For those unfamiliar, a royal warrant is basically an official seal of approval, a sign that a company is trusted enough to supply goods to the royal household. It's a mark of prestige that companies hold onto for generations. Hoover lost it, directly as a result of this fiasco. In 2004, the BBC made an entire documentary about the whole saga as part of a series called Trouble at the Top. It was watched by 1.7 million people, a reminder that more than a decade later, this story still fascinated the public. And here's the thing, it still fascinates people today, because it's now taught in business schools and marketing courses around the world as one of the ultimate cautionary tales in promotional planning. The lesson is almost embarrassingly simple. In hindsight, if a risk consultant looks at your promotion and says the math doesn't add up, maybe don't launch the promotion. Hoover ignored that warning because they were betting on customer laziness. They assumed most people wouldn't bother chasing down a prize that valuable. It's one of the most human miscalculations imaginable, and it's exactly why this story still holds up as genuinely entertaining, more than 30 years later. It's not really a story about vacuum cleaners at all. It's a story about what happens when a company forgets that customers are smarter and more determined than they're given credit for. So here's a question worth sitting with. If a company offered you free flights worth 6 times what you were spending, would you have seen it as a red flag? Or would you have been first in line at the store, buying the cheapest vacuum cleaner you could find? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to see the next entry in the world's greatest corporate blunders, you already know what to do.